How do haircuts influence self-perception? How our hair might influence our behavior? I witnessed over the years anecdotal and equal to one evidence only, some would even say my experiences with haircuts. One could describe as overall weird. Following are a few questions that came up repeatedly. Why does shortening a haircut usually make oneself look worse, whereas shortening by a larger length of hair seemingly bypasses this slightly shorter hair looks like before, but slightly worse effect? How does this bypass, or is this bypass, effect achieved? To which degree is our self-image based on the current overall style, including the length of hair? How to optimize the ratios, meaning that the lengths relative to each other, but also the total length of head hair due to the observer n equal to 1 being male for the most part, conventionally male, i.e. shorter length haircuts. Why has there been almost no innovation in the tools used to cut hair, apart from electrical clippers? Why has no one invented a machine yet which is able to approach every single hair or a small set thereof in a perpendicular fashion, see inserts in later text, and therefore is able to match all the lengths of an existing head of hair to a digital model that is the result of either the head of hair's own internal selection process or less thereof and more a more or less automated solution that is general based on very few to none inputs? Why is less than optimal haircut perceived as so detrimental, often seemingly diminishing perceived self-worth for days, weeks, then approximating the average as the middle of the hair length, then maximizing until the next cutoff, therefore seemingly linked potentially in a linear fashion or in another type of function, but still growing with hair length? What happens if, as a result of this one stop, shortening the hair, thereby bypassing the resets in self-worth? Why is haircutting a probably thousands of year-old task that is often outsourced to paid peers, otherwise known as barbers? What makes cutting one's own hair so difficult? Has the invention of either directly reflecting surfaces, i.e. mirrors, or indirectly reflecting ones such as phones with selfie cameras changed the base rate of how many at least attempt to cut their own hair? Not strictly following that outline, probably leaning more towards an anecdotal than the just suggested less anecdotal style, I will now attempt to link the questions with the experiences that resulted in these. When considerably younger, I didn't really think about haircuts, which just makes me an average child, which up to a certain age just doesn't yet have reached the following necessary steps yet in order to be self-conscious about its own haircut. Based on what a child sees in the mirror, here the corresponding 5 stages. 1, that's a mirror. 2, there's a person in it. 3, that person is me. 4, that person is going to be me forever. And 5, and everyone else can see it. Source is linked here. Or in the words of Rihanna, when the sun shines, we'll shine together, told you I'll be here forever. Since a haircut is close to the thing we see in the mirror, mostly the face, if not for a whole body mirror, one could argue you could at least to some extent link the perception of one's own self with the perception of one's own hair, given the fact homunculus has a very large head compared to the rest of his body. Now homunculus only is a representation of how much cerebral cortex of the brain is devoted to an area. There are 2 versions of homunculus apart from the 2 sexes, not so much a visual representation of our own mental model of oneself. In this regard, it would be very interesting, at least for the purpose of answering said questions, how important our head is compared to the rest of our body, given an actual accurate representation of our mental model of ourselves, given the assumption 1, this mental model exists, and 2, there are differences between this mental model and the physical body it represents. Given everything we perceive is based on sensory input, not the actual sensory raw data, but much more the already prepared and pre-interpreted data, one could argue everything we perceive and can think about is based on this mental model, even though probably able to adjust to even big changes, one could ask oneself. How now a change in hairstyle, with hairstyle and as the combination thereof baseline absolute hair, relative hair length, and what is made out of this head of hair, on a day-to-day basis when either not slightly or starkly adjusting given head of hair in a specific unit of time, such as the day or the half-day. Now, excluding the slightly cut hair looks overall worse effect, one could argue that the perception of one's own head of hair, simplified as mentioned in hairstyle, is largely based on the remaining 2 variables, effectively excluding the baseline absolute length. 1, the relative length of hairs or sections of hairs to each other. 2, one one's ability to turn the given head of hair, with the head of hair being the combination of absolute and relative length, into a hairstyle. Another reasonable assumption this would be to assume a more or less constant increase in skill level over a given lifetime, given an assumption of a general ability to learn, accompanied by an assumption of an objective for general optimization, in this case applied to the ability to improve one's own hairstyling, which now does refer to the ability to turn a given head of hair into an overall hairstyle. The next logical question, given the optimization drive, could be the following: which parameters or variables can one influence, and to which extent? Absolute length. One selection of absolute length is largely constrained by the following factors: social standards, the reliance on third-party service, i.e. a barbershop, or a less professional and standardized version thereof, relatives, friends. Here one could argue that haircuts could, at least to some extent, be correlated both in positive and negative ways to the general perception of the ratio between the perceived maximized one possible level of altruism and the perceived actual average level thereof, possibly resulting in a revenge haircut or the opposite thereof. The absolute length can be varied by two factors: time, on average about +1 centimeter per month, or scissors up to maybe reducing hair length to 1 centimeter, then razors and shavers to reduce to almost 0 centimeters. Hair can be cut by anything with a maneuverable arm or another apparatus able to well cut hair. Proposed are already vacuum haircut machines. Relative length. One's ability to effectively select for a high-quality haircut related a high-quality service of a barber or barbershop, even though service, as the word is commonly used, does not exclusively rely on the actual outcome, but much rather possibly is a conglomerate of the perceived quality of a service based on parameters such as friendliness, price, performance, needed time, perception of the haircut days, weeks after the cut, etc. Influenced either by cutting off hair or by time adding constant absolute units of hair, thereby infinitely small, constantly altering relative hair lengths of all hairs, provided all hairs aren't exactly the same length. Styling of the hair. The process of turning hair or giving absolute and relative length into given absolute and relative length into a hairstyle is styling. Amount density of hair over the course of one's lifetime, determined by genes, which then impact biological sex propensity for the different types of hair loss. Androgenic alopecia, or male pattern hair loss, or male pattern baldness, or pattern hair loss can also occur in females. Alopecia areata, spot baldness. Medical treatments causing hair loss, cancer. Stress-induced temporary hair loss, stop of growth periods leads to falling of more hair in relation to new hair growing. Treatment of the effects of the amount density of hair interfering causes. Example given: treating male pattern baldness with minoxidil finasteride. Beard hair. In men, the beard can be used as an extension or addition to the scalp hair, but this means practically relative length is constantly changing. Therefore, that what we see as a haircut is changing as soon as one gets out of the barbershop or packs the scissors at home away. Therefore, one could and can and maybe should optimize a haircut for the point in time at which the proportions of all the hairs to all the other hairs, example given top hair or side hair, are as wished. A barber might choose financially incentivized the point of optimality where the hair looks the best right after the cut in order to be perceived as skilled as possible, or to justifying the maybe higher priced service and moving the period in which the haircut begins to look worse and worse from the point of time on at which exiting the shop, and then with constant hair growth slowly degrading the set relative lengths. Since all hairs, no matter the starting length, as they grow longer with absolute values, come closer and closer to each in terms of length as time increases. In other words, in infinity they all eventually are the same length. An optimal haircut, therefore, would account for these effects and include the different stages of hair length until the next cut in the planning of the haircut. Example given: cutting harder proportions, i.e. more contrast in lengths, in order to compensate for the after 3 months all hair seemingly same length effect. Here is an example of this. This was not a grown out 6-month head of hair, but I actually had cut it down a few weeks before. By this time, without using my haircut skills, aka growing out my hair increases, my hair cutting skills begin to decrease. Therefore, I noticed that often, after a long period of hair growth, I just cannot see that well anymore what the optimal haircut actually would be. Therefore, splitting it into two: 1, shortening the length, the rough cut, then 2, A few weeks later, refining is a strategy I implemented over the last 9 years since starting to cut my own hair. Now, apart from the obvious color differential resulting from bleaching my hair and the difference in top rest hair length making this exactly visible, I just went with it and grew this in the beginning quite a harsh differential between top and bottom hair out. So, as mentioned here, I did have a color differential, which was the result of me bleaching my hair at one point in time, which one can see on the blog, or if you're reading the blog, or also if you're watching this as a video. Now, apart from the obvious color if you're listening to this as an audio, then you might just stick with the audio. Now, apart from the obvious color differential resulting from the bleaching of my hair and the difference in top, I already read this, I think. Ridiculous. I am ridiculous. After 28 days, the mistake of cutting in a little bit too much on the rear sides is still really apparent. So I, in the pictures here, cut it really rough, as I mentioned, and therefore the difference is still really apparent, as I also wrote. At the bottom, it is apparent that the hair is slightly longer due to the head form and inconvenience while cutting. So there's this phenomenon where on the bottom, basically, it is really inconvenient to cut, as you might have guessed, as I just said. And for this reason, the hair that is next to basically your neck is often, I found, a little bit longer. After 90 days, I inserted the pictures here, and it just looks a little bit different. It just looks like a haircut that is grown a little bit out. And after 2 months, it also is a little bit different, but I think I also cut it here again. After 4 months, I now have also pictures, and now you can begin to style your hair differently after 4 months. So as the rest of the hair got lighter in color, mostly due to UV radiation probably, the hair color differential decreases, which was kind of nice. So I do have kind of darker hair, but it does decrease in darkness as when exposed to possibly EV radiation, maybe also the salt of the sea and stuff like this. Then a beard cut, hair length entering e-boy territory. So the hair is now longer again. Then I decided to try growing out my hair. As I'm reading this, I realize this might not be the best thing to listen to when audio, because there are examples of pictures inserted into the blog post or also into the video. Noticeable with a bleaching spray, I lightened up. I lightened up the blend of the two hair colors of a few months prior, before I decided to darken out the highlights with a hair color originally intended for my beard to give the hair overall a more natural look. If interested in the beard coloring, I made a few videos about these. Then I cut it off, mostly because more and more hair thinning seemed to appear, and maybe also due to stress-related hair loss, or also by the longer heavier hair sped up process of androgenic alopecia kicking in. Also noteworthy, there seems to be an effect of hair and beard length on body fat and posture. Body fat changes are due to the obscurance less visible, and my mind trained on the appearance of 2 decades of my unbearded face with short hair cuts had probably a harder time noticing slight changes in facial volume. The additional hair obscures a potential nerd neck. Therefore, also, the process of self-correction in terms of posture probably slowed down or became less effective. This is just before I cut it off. So here, pictures of me having head hair that is about the length, a little bit, almost touching my shoulders, one could say. I really would have wished that I would have managed to get down to my normal body fat range while still having long hair, and seen me with longer hair, but for me, normal face. But I seemingly just couldn't manage to do so. Maybe due to the accumulation of the multiple mentioned effects, worse posture, worse ability to self-correct either less efficiently or on a larger time scale. Also, the higher body fat seemingly negatively influenced my behavior, of which my body and its fat stores in regard to appearance, mostly the subcutaneous ones, is a function. Originally, I intended to standardize hair cutting time to every 6 months to allow me to ignore how my hair looked and how I could potentially change it with a 3-hour haircut session for even longer periods of time, of which 2 years was the longest. But mostly due to my seemingly more and more noticeable hair loss, I decided to cut my hair off 3 months before New Year and start treating my hair with minoxidil, which is a hair growth medication, shifts growing and shedding phases towards proportionally longer growing phases. And this is a few days after the cut. So here I inserted pictures with me having normal kind of head hair. The top hair is still a little bit longer, and the side hair is a little bit shorter. I think I cut it maybe to the length of what is left sticking out in terms of the hair of my fingers. If I take 2 fingers and push it basically onto the bottom of my head of hair and then just cut the rest off. And this is a few days after the cut, with darker appearance due to pumpkin seed oil in my hair. I heard about the seemingly positively impacting male pattern hair loss. There is also a study with the pumpkin seed oil, which I included here. The conclusion of the study is, in conclusion, as topical application of PSO showed hair growth promotion, it might be regarded as a promising alternative for treatment of male pattern alopecia, also considering its composition, free fatty acids and minor components like phytoestrogens and vitamin E may have contributed to this effect. Now, originally, this article was meant to explore the various negative side effects of bad haircuts on self-perception. In short, this effect can be summarized as follows. 1. Most of our raw data input is visual. 2. We therefore mostly see the world, less hear, smell, feel it. 3. In regard to our own perception in the existing world, we have a body. 4. On this body, the head is the part that in communication we mostly focus on due to the face, eyes, speaking, but possibly also the brain in the head, and therefore the perception thereof in one's mind, in one's brain. Also, many people seem to locate their sense of self. I just added this as a comment and now I'm reading this because I still think the same. Also, many people seem to locate their sense of self behind their eyes, in their head, maybe due to the ears, eyes, nose, and mouth all being located on the head. 6. Determining how the head and face look is, apart from more fixed factors like genetics, skull, teeth, nose, jaw, eyes, skin color, hair color, hair and the hair texture, and also influenced by more malleable factors: facial musculature, facial posture, hair length for men, beard length. 7. In between those two extremes might be factors like the dental array, influenced by braces, and according to the Mewing hypothesis, also tongue posture, especially while developing. Interesting in this regard is this book, recommended by Dr. Andrew Huberman on this topic. It's called Jaws, The Story of a Hidden Epidemic, written by Sandra Kahn and Paul Ehrlich. I actually already listened to it. A few factors can be influenced on a shorter timescale. Hair color, absolute hair length, relative hair length, hairstyle, what one makes of a haircut on a day-to-day basis, beard length, beard color, eyebrows length, color shape, water retented in the skin, change in electrolyte balance, changeable skin pigmentation, also known as tan, but when done responsibly, more on the weekly timescale. Bleaching teeth. Few consider surgical interventions also on a short timescale. Filters, no, not filters, but fillers, altering shape of overall face, lips, and nose, also altering overall proportions. Downside to fillers: cost, health risk of loss of ability to judge what is normal, etc. Altering bones, correcting overbites, underbites. Also, there's another risk with fillers, though I'm not so sure about this. There seems to be a material which seems to be resolvable, but it's not actually, and then the thing that is the filler hangs out in your face for infinity. Implants. Few seemingly seek to alter face shape by implanting, example, jaw implants. To sum this point up, it costs, it is risky. Therefore, purely cosmetical interventions is probably reasonable to advise against, whereas correcting a broken nose might be considered medically necessary in order to re-establish baseline function. Left to comparably easy to influence are therefore color of all head hair, length of all head hair. These are comparably cheap, can be changed on a very short timescale, and therefore alter our own perception of us. Permanent changes to face posture, body posture, influencing head posture might also be considered more on the larger timescale, since posture is probably mostly influenced by altering habits, which usually take time to build. Therefore, the best candidate for the reason why altering head hair in all forms might be so common, apart from tanning and bleaching it, is that these are the few factors left one can influence, either alone or with the help of a barber, hair studio, or scissor. My past perception change of myself based on a seemingly negative change in appearance due to a change in hair length, absolute relative, equaling a haircut, therefore over time probably induced a negative association with the whole process, but also with the necessity to get my hair cut. The relation between my self-confidence and haircut, other factors excluded, could be visually represented like this. So inserted here is a graphic with some fluctuation. So it's a two-dimensional graphic. One graph is going to the right, one, not the graph itself, but one line is going to the right, one line is going, or X, I think it's called axis. One is going to the right, is called time, and the other one is going above, is called self-confidence. So there are 2 points in time we need to consider. The first one is the first haircut, and the second one is the second haircut. The baseline is in the middle. So the baseline is just in the middle of self-confidence, because obviously it's the baseline. So now, if there is a haircut, my confidence basically drops to 0. It doesn't mean that it drops to 0 in absolute levels. It's just maybe there's just a cutout of a relative cutout of the whole entire function. So it drops a few points basically, and then it rises again, it rises again, it rises again, until it is basically the same part in equal amplitude above the baseline as it was below when I did the haircut, and then it falls again in the next haircut. So it's basically kind of a step function that looks like a triangle. That's it. One major thing to be stated, it also could be seen as a wave that is crushing to the shore, that is time on the right, and it goes on from the left, and the bottom of the waves is the haircut. One major thing to be stated is that this effect, anecdotally experienced by historic versions of myself, is probably more pronounced the higher the impact of a given haircut on the overall appearance of the face, head, and body is. The longer the hair at a given absolute cutoff, the higher the impact of the effect. Example, cutting off 3 centimeters of shoulder length hair might be barely noticeable. With a typical short haircut, the 3 months of growth. Also for the other hair, assuming average growth rates, and for someone with 3 centimeter equal length head hair, it is the difference from being bald and having 3 centimeter hair. About responsibility. For years I internally complained, would have liked to not go out for days after a bad haircut, because obviously I looked absolutely ridiculous. Again, everybody would obviously notice, laugh at me, could not take me seriously. How could I ever be able to ever normally talk to people again? But I had to go on. School didn't pause because of a bad haircut, and ultimately, as time passed by, it got better until I took responsibility. Of course, this was not a "and then I finally said enough" moment, but I realized over the years the following. I could just pause haircuts if I did not want to, if I did want to. Apart from the felt increase in social pressure to then get a haircut again, there was not that much stopping me. Mom, how about going to the barber in 2 weeks with the siblings? Nobody could know what haircut I wanted if I didn't communicate it properly. I didn't write down a good explanation of what I wanted. I didn't bring pictures. Due to a family friend cutting my hair for years, I also only once was in a hair salon and didn't have the idea of maybe either pointing on, or taking my own pictures, maybe of myself with good looking hair, to the barber. I also probably didn't really know what I wanted. I also for years did not realize the large impact of facial posture, short term, as seen below, typical mouth breather of body fat on my face. I also therefore, mostly due to being unaware, intervene. I also, mostly due to being unaware in my diet to optimize for facial aesthetics. I didn't, my ability to form complex sentences is sometimes interrupted by my lacking ability improve reading. In my diet to optimize for facial aesthetics, which then ideally is what improves how any haircut would look on me, etc., etc. So what I'm trying to say here is that I was unable to intervene in my diet and to optimize it for facial aesthetics, so to be leaner. And finally, I just didn't take it on myself to take care of my own hair, until I did. 1. I paused haircuts multiple times in my eyes, procrastinating on my haircut. Shorter hair also is just more practical. 2. I switched to a hair salon, which introduced even more variables into the equation, different people working there with names I couldn't remember in the time frame of months, resulting in walking out of the hair salon a few times frustrated, knowing I would also shit on myself for days or weeks. Why did I write this here? Or weeks, because it was my responsibility to sort that problem out, and I had failed once again. I also couldn't do anything about it, apart from going there once again, only to leave more frustrated and with a worse haircut than before, leaving 18 euros behind. Comparably cheap female friends told me they often paid 40 to 100 euros for a haircut. More and more, this thought grew in me, fueled by frustration. So, 3rd, after another shitty haircut, right before I would go on a school trip to Istanbul, I refined the haircut using hair scissors we already had at home, and I just didn't dare to use them. My mind full of stories of children and other teenagers having cut their own hair, and usually everybody ending up making fun of them due to low skill equals bad haircut. For taking pictures, I began to take sometimes standardized pictures, sometimes just with a phone, of good and bad hairstyles and cuts of myself, despite feeling silly about it, to build a reference database, how my head looked, how my hair looked, with different cuts, proportions, body fat levels, etc. And also just how does your hair look from the side and from behind. You cannot really see it properly if you don't have two mirrors. Mirrors. 5. Right after that one good cut in years, I decided to just leave it at that and grew it out for a full year. Something never there before. I I liked how it looked. I liked it that I didn't have to worry about it any longer, even though it wasn't a singular decision, but much more again the procrastination on the responsibility to now explore this even further, to take on even more responsibility and switch to cutting my own hair, not just refining it. 6. I bought scissors and cut my hair. Usually just trying to shorten it every about 3 months, which turned out to be an endurance workout for my arms, quite complicated and usually took me with preparing and cleaning about 3 hours. What helped me tremendously was one YouTube channel, Slick Har or Hair TV. I made mistakes upon mistakes, but the baseline was different and I could change it at any point in time. And to this day, since leaving that door in the local hair salon in May 2014, nobody apart from myself ever cut my hair again. I gained skill, more mental ability, more mental stability, the ability to cut my own hair till the end of days, till the end of my days. Therefore, solving a problem that had caused severe behavior-altering changes in my levels of self-confidence in a visual-based world, once and for all, but one haircut at a time. Further examples. Here I inserted a picture of me as Wolverine with spiky hair. Then there is a picture of me as Jason Momoa, casually looking to the side with shirt off, while obviously posing just for the picture. And then I have a picture of me as Thor with grown out hair.